All right, Alexander, we have Biden's speech, a foreign policy speech. I guess this is his first foreign policy speech official as the President of the United States. What did you make of this speech? He covered Russia. Russia's the enemy again, from what I take it. I'll summarize it real quick. Russia's the enemy again. He says that the U.S. is pulling out of Yemen, but they're still going to support Saudi Arabia, whatever that means. Sanctions on Myanmar. And what else? Oh, China. Well, we might take a tough stance on China, Biden said, but he's kind of, leaving his options open there. I guess it depends on what information China wants to throw out there. Anyway, Alexander, what do you make of this, of his first, and it is his first, if I'm not mistaken, his first foreign policy speech as president?
It's his first foreign policy speech as president. He did make his speech during the transition period on foreign policy, which I actually covered for my channel, and which I said how utterly boring that was. And to be frank, I found this speech also extremely boring. I mean, it absolutely broke no new ground at all. What to say? Firstly, as you rightly say, Russia is again officially the enemy. But when you unpack his comments about Russia, and by the way, this is going to turn out to be the pattern throughout the speech, he talks big, but where Theodore Roosevelt talked about, the US talking soft and carrying a big stick, Biden talks big, but with Russia and to some extent with China, in fact, to a great extent with China, he seems to be carrying a feather duster because, yes, he said all sorts of things about Russia. He said about how, the United States is going to be really tough and will stand up to Russia, and how he spoke clearly and forcefully to Putin over the telephone, and how differently he spoke to Putin from Donald Trump. Of course, he doesn't know how Donald Trump spoke to Putin, so we don't know what exactly went on there, and Biden is making that up. But anyway, he says that he's going to be tough and mean and all the rest with the Russians. But of course, he lets slip the fact that on the big issue of substance, he's actually agreed an arms control deal with them, a 5-year extension of the New START treaty, which is, remember, something which Donald Trump refused to do. So in reality, for all Biden's strong words and his attempts to distinguish himself from Trump by pretending he's going to be tougher with the Russians than Donald Trump was, in reality, he has already made a major concession to the Russians, which Donald Trump refused to make. He has agreed to the extension of the New START treaty entirely without conditions, as the Russians had insisted. So he's actually conceded to the Russians on this. I would add also that there is a rather interesting article appearing in the New York Times, which we don't know how well sourced it is, but it's supposed to be based upon information given to the New York Times by one of Biden's advisors, which says that the US is maxed out on sanctions with Russia, and that they're no longer thinking of imposing more across-the-board sanctions on Russia. So it looks like the only thing that the US is actually going to do from now on in terms of Russia, in terms of the direct bilateral relationship, is that they're going to impose individual sanctions on individual Russian officials. They must be running out of Russian officials they can impose sanctions on. And what I understand from reading the Russian media is that in Moscow itself, being sanctioned by the US is treated as a badge of honor. So it is practically, in all intents and purposes, an ineffectual thing. Anyway, that's Russia. China, And it's exactly the same. He says that the United States is going to stand up to China and it's going to work together with its allies, and that China is acting against challenging the United States for global leadership. And then, of course, he says at the same time that the United States is going to work with Beijing. So Donald Trump, whatever you may think of this policy, took a position of being consistently antagonistic to China. I mean, he did it for all kinds of reasons. Probably he was looking in the end to cut a deal with the Chinese, but that was his line. He was consistent. He was taking a hard line with China. Joe Biden, again, talks big, but where's the beef? We don't really see anything. He doesn't actually say anything that he's really going to do. Then he goes on and talks about Saudi Arabia. He's not going to support offensive operations by the Saudis in Yemen. That's something obviously that some people in the United States, many left-wing anti-war people who voted for Biden, perhaps also some conservative people want to see. They don't like MBS. They're right not to like MBS, in my opinion. They're right to disapprove of the Yemen war. But at the same time, he says that he's going to continue to protect Saudi Arabia from the Iranians. So we don't really know how these two things are, how they can be reconciled, because the Saudis say that the reason they're fighting in Yemen is to protect themselves from Iranian proxies there. And Biden seems to agree with that. And Biden says that he's going to protect Saudi Arabia from Iran. So perhaps this statement, this grand statement that he's not going to support Saudi Arabian offensive actions in Yemen is not quite as strong as it seems. And then, of course, it's easy to talk about Myanmar, because imposing sanctions and all that on Myanmar comes with no real cost. But the really difficult issues, Iran and North Korea, he says nothing about. And the Middle East also.
Yeah, I also forgot to mention that two more important points. One is with he's reversing the troop withdrawal from Trump, especially in Germany. So we're going to have more troops pouring back in. And then he also made a statement about refugees, that pretty much open door policy to refugees that want to come to the United States. So those were two more points that he made. With regards to Yemen, is how much of a difference does the U.S. make by not supporting Saudi Arabia? Was the U.S. really that engaged in Yemen, or was it just more as a supporting role with Saudi Arabia? Because yes, it is a good thing if the U.S. just gets out of Yemen, period. But I think an even better move would be for a U.S. administration to tell Saudi Arabia, this ends now. This war ends now. So, I mean, I'm trying to understand, does it really make a difference as far as the offensive is concerned? I mean, was the U.S. really engaged in an offensive against Yemen, or was it just pretty much acting through Saudi Arabia as a proxy?
I mean, you put your finger on it, because, of course, it was acting through Saudi Arabia as a proxy. It wasn't directly engaged. Obviously, there have been American advisors, there have been American officials, there have been all that sort of thing. But you're perfectly correct. If Joe Biden had said in this speech, Saudi Arabia must withdraw all its forces from Yemen, that would have been a big, strong, clear decision. That would have really been the end of the Yemen war. But that's not what he said. He says that the United States will not support Saudi offensive action in Yemen, but it will continue to support Saudi action to protect Saudi Arabia from Iran. Now, you can easily repackage that and talk about Saudi actions in Yemen not being offensive, but intended to protect Saudi Arabia from Iran. I don't think this is actually going to make any difference. It's just a form of words intended to appease some people in the United States, some people in the Democratic Party who don't like Saudi Arabia for all sorts of reasons, are unhappy about the Yemen war and all that. It's virtue signalling, if you like. I mean, in fact, it is virtue signalling. But it actually, when you unpack it, it doesn't really mean anything. If he said, this war ends now, that would have made a difference. And of course, sending the troops back to Germany, or rather freezing the withdrawal of troops from Germany, well, he's doing that because Angela Merkel wants the troops there. Because keeping US troops in Germany relieves the Germans of having to take steps to increase their own defence spending, which is what the Germans don't want to do. They want to hide behind the US defence umbrella, and they want the US troops, therefore, to stay. And Donald Trump saw that as a racket, which in effect it was, and he said to the Germans, very well, if you're not prepared to take steps to defend yourselves, we're not prepared to defend you either, and pull the troops out. And of course, Joe Biden, on the contrary, because he's so keen on making friends with the US allies again, is putting a stop to that, because that's what Angela Merkel wants, and so the Germans can go back to letting their military spending fall, and happy that they can rely on the United States to defend them in the event that there is any real risk or threat to Germany, which of course there isn't. So it's that kind of game that Biden plays. He appears to be taking positions, strong positions, but when you look behind the words, actually, there isn't really very much substance there. Now, there are comments about immigration. He's very keen, it seems, on immigration, and he's going to take, a leading role on that. There's lots of virtue signalling on various topics in this speech. On foreign policy, on the hard issues of geopolitics, he has very little to say. And on Iran and North Korea, the two most intractable issues, what he's going to do with the JCPOA, what he's going to do with the burgeoning and very public North Korean military and nuclear missile programs. We did a program about this, and we spoke about how the North Koreans are now actively, it seems, working on building nuclear ballistic missile submarines with missiles that can reach the continental United States. About these really critical issues, he has nothing to say. He says nothing about Iran. Says nothing about North Korea either, even though in real terms, those are the most serious challenges that the United States, or at least the most urgent challenges that the United States faces now. It's got to come to some kind of understanding, or at least arrangements with China and Russia. But that's, the grand geopolitical game, if you like. If you're talking about the immediate threats to the United States, they come from North Korea and from Iran, in the sense that these are the two countries with which the United States is locked in a confrontation with, which are building up their forces, and with which the United States has no direct line of communication, because it doesn't have diplomatic relations with either country. And yet, Joe Biden has nothing to say about that.
All right, so let me ask you different questions, but maybe it all leads to the same analysis here on your part. No, if I parse through Biden's speech, it just reminds me of a watered down Obama speech. In essence, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same speechwriter. But North Korea, my hunch would be he's not going to do anything with North Korea. That would be my hunch if I look at Obama as well. Iran, I'm not sure. I mean, that's a question I'll throw at you. But looking at Obama, would Biden do something against Iran, even at the behest of, even if Israel wanted him to? Because we have had threats from Israel towards Iran, but Obama never went there, and I have doubts that Biden will go there as well. And finally, it looks like if you look at what they're aiming for in the U.S. with the word domestic terrorism and this misinformation, hunting down people that are spreading misinformation, and they're tying it to Russia. And these people that are talking about misinformation, they're obviously aligned with Russia. I look at some what's going on in Ukraine, for example, and the fact that Ukraine is now starting to take very tough actions against Russian media channels and people that want to speak Russian, and the U.S. Embassy is supporting that, and they're also calling it Russian disinformation. I mean, we're starting to see the blend between misinformation, realities are domestic terrorism, and Russia once again. And then I listened to that speech. Do you get the feeling that we're going back to a Russia did it, Obama foreign policy again? And if so, are we heading back towards not so much antagonizing Russia per se, because they can't do that, but going back to Syria and other places where Russia is engaged once again, proxy wars? I mean, looking at the domestic rhetoric and then trying to parse through this foreign policy speech, what do you see?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. This does read very much like a pale, watered-down version of an Obama speech. Obama had his foreign policy speeches. They were very difficult to read. You had to pass them very carefully, and at least there was sort of an energy in them. This is like that, and it's got no energy. That's the difference. I mean, you also have to pass it, but there is none of the sort of force that Obama's speeches did. And that is the difference. But on the substance, they're very similar, and they're very difficult as a result to actually look at and say, this is where the United States is going. With Donald Trump, you could say that. I mean, even if Donald Trump had always problems getting his policies accepted by his administration, at least he had a clear idea of where he wanted to go. You don't really have this here, because he says, on the one hand, I'm going to do this, on the other hand, I'm going to do that, and the two, in the end, seem to cancel each other out. Now, going back to North Korea and Iran, I think the reason Biden doesn't talk about those two countries, and he doesn't even talk about Ukraine either, by the way, is because he doesn't know what to do. He hasn't a clue what step to take with respect to North Korea and Iran, or indeed Ukraine. So he doesn't say anything. And I think it's the classic tactic of just kicking the can down the road, or not talking about a problem, if you like, and hoping it will go away. Again, the contrast with Trump is striking. Trump at least tried to take these problems head on. You might have disagreed with the solutions, but at least he brought urgency to the problem, and he tried to find ways to deal with it. He spoke, as we know, he had meetings with Kim Jong-un. He took a very hard line with the Ayatollahs, and he was obstructed at every step in what he was trying to do, but at least there was action. Here, I don't think we're going to see any action at all, and I absolutely do not think that Joe Biden has any conceivable idea of taking on Iran, certainly not in military terms. I think that possibility simply does not exist. The Israelis might want it, but I don't think Joe Biden is up for it at all. So, in effect, a policy of no policy. That's how it looks to me. Now, I entirely agree with you on the other point, which is that, of course, this administration is overwhelmingly focused on domestic control. We've discussed this in previous programs, that there seems to be an extraordinary sense of fragility, a tremendous sense of insecurity, a fear, if you like, that the situation in the United States itself is not fully under control. And the result is we have all these attempts to brand dissident opinions as information and to clamp down on them. And we've seen all of that happening all over the United States. And of course, we're going to see again the revival of the Russian spectre over this. But it's quite clear that this isn't really about Russia itself anymore. The United States, or at least the Joe Biden administration, isn't really interested in taking on Russia per se. They want to use Russia as a scarecrow in order to do things within the United States itself and to justify doing those things, which they might have difficulty justifying otherwise. So we talk about the Russians being involved in all sorts of nefarious cyber activities. We talk about the Russians wanting to undermine US democracy. There's actually a comment about that in Biden's speech. We hear about the Russians wanting to undermine democracy in Ukraine as well, with its disinformation there, though it's important to say that the channels that we're talking about are actually Ukrainian channels aligned with Ukraine's opposition party, its legitimate democratic opposition party, which happen to use the Russian language. So it's a complete misrepresentation to speak of these as Russian government channels. They are Ukrainian channels which are being suppressed. But anything that appears to link disinformation, as it's now called, to Russia is being seized upon in order to legitimize these domestic campaigns which we've been seeing rolled out in the United States over the last few weeks. And that's going to continue. But at the same time, that's not going to prevent Joe Biden from cutting those kind of deals with the Russians that are of mutual interest, at least as he sees it, to the US. So they're not going to engage the Russians in an arms race. They're probably not going to impose any more real and serious sanctions on Russia. They're probably going to ramp down confrontation with the Russians in other places. There may be more pressure on the Middle East, but it doesn't look as if they're prepared to take on the Russian military in Syria, for example. So Russia as an adversary, perhaps. Russia as an enemy we're going to confront, definitely not. Russia as a useful scarecrow that we can use to justify all sorts of steps in the United States, absolutely. And that's perhaps the most important thing for us. We want to use that scarecrow in order to take measures within the United States itself, and we'll be seeing more and more of that, I'm no doubt, over the next few weeks and months going forward.
Okay, but very quickly, going after Trump and this orange man bad thing as a tool to distract people and to keep the left unified, it can only last so long. I mean, I already start to see that it's fading away. So they've got the trial; they'll buy another month or two, but after that, everyone knows that the Biden administration and the neocons and the neoliberals are just dying and itching to go to war somewhere. Where is that going to be? I mean, if you had to, are we looking in South America? Are we looking at Venezuela? Are we looking at Syria? Are we looking, we said Iran, no, but what do you think? Because they're going to need to do something to distract once the orange man bad has run its course. And that distraction is going to be, not only is it going to be a domestic hunt for misinformants, that's going to take place as well, but they're going to do something on the international scene. If you had to take a guess, region, country, what do you see?
It'll be in the Middle East, and it might not take on the Russians directly in Syria, but we could certainly see military action being taken around Syria. I mean, Lebanon is a real possibility, for example, and Iraq again. It's not impossible. And we could see all kinds of things going on there. And you're absolutely right. They are absolutely looking for a conflict somewhere. I'm going to guess, by the way, that it's not going to be Venezuela, because going after Venezuela or intervening in South America is going to open up divisions within the Democratic Party, because, there's some people in the Democratic Party who are of a socialist view, and they actually rather sympathetic to the Maduro government, for example, in Venezuela. And Joe Biden has even hinted that he might be open to re-establishing relations with Cuba, which of course Obama did. So it'll be the Middle East. It'll be somewhere in the Middle East. It might be in Africa. It might be in all those sorts of places. But it will try to be contained. It will be far away from, where it could lead to a real clash with the Russians, because we don't really want to take on the Russians, or at least that seems to be the word at the moment. Of course, anything can change from one day to the other, and it's possible that, if you keep up the anti-Russian campaigns, they could get out of your control. That's always possible, but that doesn't seem to be at the agenda at the moment. If I'm going to make a guess, I'd say Lebanon. Lebanon is a place which is under a lot of pressure at the moment, where there are all sorts of movements which the United States defines as terrorist, where the United States has been before, and which is close to Syria, and which the Syrian government, which I think the United States still has very much in its sights. Syria and Lebanon are tightly integrated with each other, and Syria is highly dependent on the Lebanese banking system, which is in crisis. So I would not be at all surprised if we saw an escalation of US interference in Lebanon, and possibly even some form of military intervention there. Remember, Hezbollah is based there. All sorts of other movements are based there. There's strong Palestinian groups there. There's also some jihadi groups that are also there. So you could always find some justification for doing something in Lebanon. Of course, the United States was in Lebanon in the early 1980s. It didn't work out well then. I suspect it won't work out well now. Ronald Reagan, who was a strong president, understood the importance of bringing all that to an end, and he brought the troops home. And I doubt that Joe Biden, who is not a strong president, will do the same. But I, by the way, also agree with your other point that this facade of unity is already cracking, and before very long we will see that this new administration is basically a great deal less than the sum of its various parts, and is basically running empty of any real fuel.
All right, we'll leave it there. Alexander Berkhurst, thank you very much. Guys, PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar, Bitcoin. Please help us out on those platforms. Also look for us on BitChute, on Rumble, and on Parler. Look for Alexander's channel down below. Look for Alexander's channel on Odyssey. Also look for it on BitChute. Look for my channel down below. Also look for my channel on BitChute and on Odyssey as well. All those links are in the description box. I hope all those links are in the description box. And of course, go to the Duran shop and pick up some merch. Like maybe I got this about a week ago, my new USA navy blue with the black logo with the USA flag t-shirt.
It looks amazing. It looks absolutely amazing. You find shirts like that in our shop, and you find our famous magic mugs, and you find our extraordinary hats, our brilliant hats, our amazing T-shirts like the one Alex is wearing now. And, they come both long-sleeved and short-sleeved, and they're all cotton. And you can also find hoodies and other great things there. And you support us by coming to our shop, and you support us by finding us on our other platforms, and by supporting us through Patreon, Subscribestar, and PayPal, and the rest. And please remember to subscribe to this channel and to the other channels also. And we look forward to you joining us in our next program.
All right. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.